facing our fear. Living with my best friend Rachel was supposed to be fun, a new chapter in our lives. We had just finished college and decided to rent a small apartment together in the city. It was an old building, but cozy and full of character, with tall, narrow windows that let in just enough light to make it feel homey. We spent our first few weeks decorating, cooking meals together, and staying up late watching horror movies, laughing off the scares. Life was good, or so we thought. The first sign that something was wrong happened on a Tuesday night. I had just gone to bed, exhausted from a long day at work. Rachel had already turned in, and the apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the city outside. I drifted off quickly, but it wasn't long before I woke up with a start, feeling an odd pressure in the room. At first, I thought it was just a bad dream, but as I lay there, I realized I couldn't move. My body was frozen, pinned to the bed by an invisible force. Panic flooded my mind as I tried to force myself to move, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't. I was completely paralyzed. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. 2 shadowy figures standing at the foot of my bed. They were tall, darker than the darkness of the room itself, and had no distinct features, just vague human-like shapes. I could feel their eyes on me, even though they had none. They were watching, waiting. My heart pounded in my chest, and I struggled to scream, to call out to Rachel, but no sound came out. The shadow figures just stood there, unmoving, as if savoring my fear. The air was thick with a sense of dread, so intense that I felt like I couldn't breathe. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. The paralysis lifted, and I shot up in bed, gasping for air, my heart racing. The room was empty, and everything looked normal, but I knew what I had seen. It wasn't a dream, it was real. The next morning, I didn't say anything to Rachel. I didn't want to sound crazy, and I hoped it was just a one-time thing, some weird trick of the mind. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The days passed uneventfully, and I almost convinced myself that the shadow figures had been nothing more than a nightmare. But the unease lingered, a dark cloud hanging over me. Every night I went to bed with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, dreading what might happen when I closed my eyes. Then, one night, it happened again. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when that same heavy feeling settled over me. My eyes snapped open, and I realized I couldn't move. I was paralyzed again. My heart sank as I felt the familiar presence in the room. Slowly, I turned my eyes toward the foot of the bed. The shadow figures were back, but this time, they weren't alone. Standing between them was a third figure, taller and more menacing than the others. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that cast a deep shadow over where his face should have been. The Hat Man. I had heard stories about him, urban legends passed around by people who claimed to have seen him during sleep paralysis. I had always thought it was just a myth, a scary story to tell around a campfire. But now, he was here, in my room, as real as the fear that gripped my chest. The Hat Man stood there, flanked by the 2 shadow figures, all of them staring down at me. Unlike the shadow figures, who seemed content just to watch, the Hat Man exuded a malevolent energy that made my skin crawl. He radiated darkness, an oppressive force that filled the room and crushed the air from my lungs. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was trapped in my own body, helpless. The Hat Man slowly lifted a hand, pointing directly at me. The shadows around him seemed to swirl and thicken, like black smoke gathering in the corners of the room. I could feel my heart racing, my pulse pounding in my ears, but there was nothing I could do. And then, just as before, they vanished. The paralysis lifted, and I bolted upright, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. The room was empty, the only sound my ragged breathing. But the fear remained, gnawing at my insides. This time, I couldn't keep it to myself. The next morning, I told Rachel everything about the sleep paralysis, the shadow figures, and the Hat Man. I expected her to laugh it off, to tell me it was just a bad dream. But she didn't. Instead, she looked at me with wide eyes, her face pale. "I've seen them too," she whispered. Rachel's confession sent chills down my spine. She told me that she had been experiencing sleep paralysis too, though she hadn't wanted to worry me. It started a few nights after I had my first encounter, but she had only seen the two shadow figures, never the Hat Man. Until now. The fact that we were both seeing the same things made it clear that this was no ordinary nightmare. Something was haunting us, something dark and sinister, and whatever it was getting stronger. We tried to rationalize it, to come up with logical explanations. Stress, maybe, or some sort of shared psychological phenomenon. But deep down, we knew the truth. The shadows were real, and the Hat Man was more than just a figment of our imagination. That night, we decided to sleep with the lights on, hoping to keep the darkness at bay. But it didn't work. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the feeling of cold air brushing against my face. I sat up, my heart pounding, and saw Rachel standing at the doorway of my room, her eyes wide with terror. "They're here," she whispered. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I looked around the room. The shadows were there, darker than the corners they lurked in. And standing in the center of the room, looming over us, was the Hat Man. He was closer this time, his shadowy form almost touching the edge of my bed. The two shadow figures flanked him as before, their eyeless faces turned toward Rachel and me. The air was thick with tension, so oppressive that it felt like we were suffocating. I could see the fear in Rachel's eyes, mirroring my own. The Hat Man didn't move, but I could feel his presence, cold and malevolent. He was more than just a shadow. He was something ancient, something evil, feeding on our fear. I could feel the darkness closing in, and I knew we had to do something, anything, to break free. "Rachel, we need to move," I whispered, my voice trembling. But before we could react, the Hat Man lifted his hand again, pointing at us. The shadow figures seemed to grow darker, more defined, as if they were becoming more real. The room felt like it was closing in on us, the darkness tightening its grip. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. The oppressive presence of the Hat Man and the shadow figures intensified, pressing down on us with a force that made it hard to breathe. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin as panic set in. "Run!" I screamed, breaking free of the paralysis that had held me. I grabbed Rachel's hand and we bolted out of the room, sprinting down the hallway. The darkness seemed to chase us, the shadows stretching and twisting in the corners of our vision. We burst into the living room, gasping for breath, and flicked on every light we could find. But the shadows didn't retreat. They lingered in the corners, just out of reach of the light, watching us. And somewhere, in the depths of that darkness, I knew the Hat Man was still there, waiting. We spent the next few days in a state of constant fear. We tried everything, leaving the lights on, sleeping in the same room, even burning sage and reciting prayers in a desperate attempt to cleanse the apartment. But nothing worked. The shadows kept coming back, and the Hat Man's presence grew stronger with each passing night. It wasn't just at night either. We started seeing the shadow figures during the day, lurking in the corners of our vision, flickering just out of sight. The sense of dread that had settled over our apartment was suffocating, and we knew we couldn't keep living like this. Rachel suggested we stay with friends or check into a hotel, but I knew it wouldn't help. The shadows were attached to us now. No matter where we went, they would follow. In a last-ditch effort, we decided to confront the darkness head-on. We did our research, finding out everything we could about sleep paralysis, shadow people, and the Hat Man. We read about people who had experienced similar hauntings and how they had fought back by facing their fears. The next night, we sat together in the living room, all the lights on, waiting. The clock ticked past midnight, and the air grew colder, the atmosphere heavier. We knew they were coming, and we were ready. When the shadows finally appeared, they were more solid than ever before. They emerged from the corners of the room, their dark forms slinking across the walls like living shadows. The temperature in the room plummeted, and our breaths came out in visible puffs of air. The light from the lamps flickered ominously, struggling against the encroaching darkness. Then, the Hat Man stepped out of the shadows, his wide-brimmed hat casting a deep shadow over his face, obscuring any features he might have had. His presence was overwhelming, a black void that seemed to suck all the light and warmth from the room. The two shadow figures flanked him as always, standing silently, their eyeless gazes fixed on us. Rachel and I clutched each other's hands, our knuckles white with fear, but we knew we couldn't run anymore. This time, we had to stand our ground. "We know what you are," Rachel said, her voice trembling but determined. "You don't control us. You can't have us." The Hat Man remained silent, his shadowy form towering over us. But something changed. The oppressive pressure in the room seemed to intensify, the darkness closing in tighter, as if he was responding to her challenge. "Leave us alone," I shouted, my voice breaking the thick silence. "You're not welcome here." For a moment, nothing happened. The shadows continued to writhe and twist, and the Hat Man stood motionless, his hand slowly rising as if to strike. But then, the lights in the room suddenly flared, burning brighter than they ever had. The darkness recoiled, retreating from the light. The Hat Man and the shadow figures flickered, their forms becoming less solid, more like smoke than substance. The oppressive weight lifted slightly, and the air in the room warmed, the icy chill receding. The light continued to shine brightly, pushing back the darkness until the shadows were forced to retreat into the corners of the room. Then, with one last flicker, the Hat Man and the shadow figures disappeared. The room was left in eerie silence, the light still blazing brightly. Rachel and I stood frozen, our hearts pounding, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. The darkness was gone. The next morning, the sun streamed through the windows, filling the apartment with warm golden light. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. Rachel and I spent the day in a daze, trying to process what had happened. We couldn't fully explain it, But we knew one thing. We had faced our fears, and somehow we had won. The shadows never returned. The Hat Man, who had haunted our nights and filled our days with dread, was gone. We still talked about that night, sometimes in hushed tones, but gradually we allowed ourselves to move on. Life returned to normal, though neither of us could forget the terror we had lived through. We became closer than ever, bonded by the ordeal, and learned to appreciate the simple, everyday things that had once seemed so trivial. But every now and then, late at night, I'd wake up to a slight shiver in the air, a brief flicker of darkness out of the corner of my eye, and I'd wonder if he was still out there, watching, waiting. The Hat Man might be gone from our lives, but I knew that he wasn't gone forever. Darkness once seen can never be completely forgotten. Shadowed by fear. Moving into my own place was supposed to be the start of something new, something good. After years of living with roommates, I finally had the chance to get a place of my own. It wasn't much, a small one-bedroom apartment in an old building on the outskirts of town. But it was mine. The rent was cheap, the neighbours kept to themselves, and I liked the quiet. The apartment had its quirks, of course. The floors creaked in the night, the plumbing groaned every time I turned on the hot water, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear the faint sounds of my neighbours' TVs late into the night. But I didn't mind. It was all part of the charm, I told myself. The first few weeks passed without incident. I settled into a routine. Work during the day, gym in the evening, and then home to unwind with a movie or some video games. Life was quiet, peaceful even. But that peace didn't last long. The first sign that something was off came one night when I was lying in bed, half asleep. I had just turned off the light and was drifting off when I felt it. A strange heaviness in the air, like the atmosphere had thickened. It felt as if the darkness was pressing down on me, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating blanket. My chest tightened, and a sense of unease crept over me, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe a result of stress from work. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I shook it off and eventually fell asleep, but that uneasy feeling lingered, even in my dreams. It was about a week later when I first saw him. I had just finished a late shift at work and was exhausted. After a quick shower, I collapsed into bed, eager to get some sleep. But as soon as I closed my eyes, that strange heaviness returned, pressing down on me with an almost tangible weight. My body froze, and I couldn't move. I tried to shift, to turn on my side, but it was like my limbs were pinned to the bed. Panic surged through me as I realized what was happening. I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I had heard about sleep paralysis before, but I had never experienced it myself. The stories were always the same. People waking up unable to move, feeling a presence in the room with them, something dark and malevolent. But I had never believed them, not really, until now. As I lay there, trapped in my own body, I felt it, a presence in the room with me. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, and I could sense something standing at the foot of my bed. Slowly, I forced my eyes open, my heart pounding in my chest. And that's when I saw him. He was tall, impossibly tall, his shadowy form stretching from the floor to the ceiling. His face was hidden in darkness, but I could see the outline of a wide-brimmed hat perched on his head, casting a long shadow over where his eyes should have been. There were no features, no eyes, no mouth, just darkness. he was nothing but a silhouette. But the sheer malevolence radiating from him was suffocating. He stood there motionless, watching me. I could feel his gaze, cold and piercing, even though he had no eyes. My heart raced, terror flooding my veins, but I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only lie there, helpless, as he loomed over me. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The heaviness lifted, my body released from its paralysis. I bolted upright, gasping for breath, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was empty, the Hat Man was gone, but the fear remained. After that night, everything changed. I couldn't shake the image of the Hat Man from my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there, his dark silhouette looming over me, watching. I started having trouble sleeping, dreading the thought of waking up to find him there again. And he did come back. Night after night, I would wake up to that same crushing heaviness, that same paralysis. And every time he would be there, standing at the foot of my bed, darker than the surrounding shadows. He never moved, never spoke, just stood there, watching me. I couldn't understand why he was haunting me, what he wanted. All I knew was that he was always there, lurking in the darkness. It wasn't long before the encounters started happening during the day. I would catch glimpses of him out of the corner of my eye. A tall shadow flickering in the hallway, a dark figure standing in the corner of my living room. But every time I turned to look, he was gone, leaving only an icy chill in the air. I began to feel like I was losing my mind. My friends noticed the change in me, the way I became more withdrawn, more anxious. I tried to explain what was happening, but how could I make them understand? They would just think I was crazy. So, I kept it to myself, letting the fear fester and grow. It all came to a head one night, a few months after the encounters had started. I was lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, too afraid to sleep. The room was silent, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. But then, without warning, the air grew thick again, the darkness pressing in on me like a suffocating shroud. I tried to move, to turn on the light, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own bed. My heart pounded in my chest, fear clawing at my throat. And then I saw him, standing in the corner of the room, his dark figure blending with the shadows. The Hat Man. But this time, he didn't just stand there. This time he moved. Slowly, almost deliberately, he stepped out of the shadows, his tall form gliding across the room toward me. The darkness around him seemed to deepen, swallowing the light, until he was nothing but a silhouette against the blackness. I could feel the cold radiating from him, seeping into my bones, freezing me from the inside out. He stopped at the foot of my bed, and for the first time, I saw his face, or rather the void where his face should have been. There were no features, no eyes, no mouth, just a yawning black emptiness. But I could feel his gaze on me, boring into me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He leaned forward, and for a moment, I thought he was going to speak. But instead, he just watched me, as if savouring my fear, feeding off it. The silence was deafening, the darkness suffocating. I wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything, but I was helpless, trapped in my own body. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. The paralysis lifted, the air lightened, and I was alone again. But the terror remained, lingering in the corners of my mind, a constant reminder that he could return at any moment. I couldn't take it anymore. The Hat Man had invaded every part of my life, my dreams, my waking hours, even my thoughts. I knew I had to get out, to escape before he consumed me completely. So I packed up and left the apartment, leaving everything behind. I moved to a new city, found a new place, tried to start over. But even though I was miles away from that apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still with me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. Every time the lights flickered, I wondered if he was watching. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that I had left him behind in that apartment. But deep down, I knew the truth. The Hat Man wasn't bound by walls or distance. He was something darker, something that thrived on fear. And as long as I feared him, he would never truly be gone. It's been months since I left that apartment, and I've tried to move on with my life. But the fear is still there, lurking in the back of my mind. I sleep with the lights on now, hoping to keep the darkness at bay. But even that isn't enough. Last night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. I froze, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to stay still. I knew what was coming. The air grew cold, the darkness deepened, and I felt that familiar weight pressing down on me. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. I turned my head slowly, my breath catching in my throat. He was there, standing in the doorway, his tall form outlined against the shadows. The Hat Man had found me. This time, I didn't try to scream. I just closed my eyes and waited, knowing that no matter where I ran, no matter how far I went, he would always be there, lurking in the darkness, watching, waiting for me. The Hat Man never truly leaves. He's always out there somewhere, waiting for the moment when your guard is down, when your fear is strong enough to draw him back in. And when that moment comes, when the darkness closes in and the shadows grow long, you'll feel his presence, cold, oppressive, and all-consuming. Because the Hat Man isn't just a figment of your imagination or a bad dream. He's real, and once he's found you, there's no escaping him. You can run, you can hide, but he'll always find you in the end. And when he does, you'll understand what true terror really is. So, if you ever wake up in the dead of night, unable to move, and feel the weight of something watching you from the shadows, don't look. Don't let him see your fear. Because if you do, the Hat Man will come closer, and once he's there, you'll never be alone again. More than nightmares. When we first moved into the old house, I never expected anything strange to happen. It was just another house, a bit older than most, with a musty smell that lingered no matter how many windows we opened. But it had character, as my wife, Maria, liked to say, and it was big enough for our growing family. Our son, Jake, seemed to like it well enough, especially since he got the biggest bedroom upstairs. Everything seemed normal, at least at first. The first sign that something was wrong happened about a week after we moved in. It was a Sunday night, and Jake had gone to bed early, worn out from a day of playing in the yard. Maria and I stayed up late, unpacking boxes in the living room. I remember the sound of the clock ticking loudly on the wall, marking the hours as they slipped by. It was just after midnight when we heard it, a soft, muffled scream coming from upstairs. We both froze, staring at each other with wide eyes. Then, without a word, we ran up the stairs to Jake's room. We found him lying in bed, his eyes wide open, his face pale as a sheet. He was gasping for breath, his small hands clutching the blankets tightly. "Jake, what's wrong?" Maria asked, rushing to his side. I couldn't move," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There was someone in my room, a man in a hat. He was standing right there." I felt a chill run down my spine. "A man in a hat? What do you mean, buddy?" Jake just shook his head, tears filling his eyes. "He was all black like a shadow. He was watching me, Dad. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream." We comforted him as best as we could, chalking it up to a nightmare. After all, moving into a new house could be unsettling, especially for a 9-year-old. But something about the fear in Jake's eyes told me this was more than just a bad dream. The next few nights were quiet. Jake didn't mention the man in the hat again, and Maria and I assumed it was just a one-time thing. But a week later, the screams returned. This time they were louder, more desperate. We found Jake sitting up in bed, his eyes wild with terror. "He's back!" he cried. "The Hat Man! He was here again!" My heart sank as I saw the sheer panic in his face. I sat on the edge of his bed, pulling him into a hug. "It's okay, Jake. It's just a nightmare. There's no one here." But even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. The fear in Jake's eyes was too real, too intense. Maria looked at me, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. We didn't know what to do. Over the next few nights, the visits from the Hat Man became more frequent. Jake would wake up screaming almost every night, claiming the shadowy figure was standing at the foot of his bed, watching him. He described the Hat Man in detail, a tall, dark figure with no discernible features except for a wide-brimmed hat that seemed to blend into the shadows. No matter how much we reassured him, Jake remained terrified. "Why can't I move, Dad?" he asked one night, tears streaming down his face. "Why can't I scream when he's here?" It was then that I realized this wasn't just a nightmare. Jake was experiencing sleep paralysis, a condition where you wake up but can't move, often accompanied by terrifying hallucinations. But knowing what it was didn't make it any less frightening. Things took a turn for the worse when the Hat Man's visits started happening during the day. Jake would refuse to go into his room, claiming he could feel the shadowy figure's presence even in the daylight. He'd sit in the living room, his eyes darting nervously towards the stairs, as if expecting the Hat Man to appear at any moment. Maria and I tried everything: nightlights, new bedding, even letting Jake sleep in our room, but nothing worked. The fear followed him, clinging to him like a dark cloud. He stopped sleeping altogether, his once bright eyes now dull and sunken. The lack of sleep was taking its toll, and I could see the exhaustion weighing him down. One night, after another terrifying episode, I decided to sleep in Jake's room with him. I thought that maybe, just maybe, my presence would keep the nightmares at bay. But what happened that night changed everything. It was around 2 a.m. when I felt a strange pressure on my chest, like something heavy was sitting on top of me. My eyes snapped open, but I couldn't move. I tried to call out to Jake, but no sound came out. Panic set in as I realized I was experiencing sleep paralysis, just like Jake. And then I saw him. Standing in the corner of the room was the Hat Man. He was exactly as Jake had described: tall, dark, and featureless, with a wide-brimmed hat that seemed to swallow the light around it. His presence was suffocating, the air thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. I could feel his gaze on me, cold and malevolent, as if he was studying me, waiting for something. I wanted to scream, to move, to do anything, but I was completely paralyzed. The Hat Man slowly drifted closer, his shadowy form looming over me. I could feel his icy breath on my face, hear the faint rustle of his coat as he moved. It felt like an eternity, trapped in that moment of pure terror, unable to escape. Finally, with a jolt, I broke free from the paralysis. The Hat Man vanished, leaving behind only the darkness and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I looked over at Jake, who was still asleep, his face peaceful. But I knew he wouldn't be for long. The next day, I told Maria everything. She listened in stunned silence, her face growing paler with every word. "Jonas, we need to do something," she said, her voice trembling. This thing is real. It's not just in Jake's head." I nodded, knowing she was right. We had to get help, but who could we turn to? This wasn't something a doctor or therapist could fix. It was something darker, something beyond our understanding. We decided to visit a local priest, Father O'Malley, who had a reputation for dealing with the paranormal. He listened to our story with a grave expression, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The Hat Man is a dark entity," he explained. "He feeds on fear, drawing strength from the terror he causes. Once he latches onto someone, it's very difficult to get rid of him. But we can try." Father O'Malley agreed to come to the house and bless it, hoping to drive the Hat Man away. That evening, he arrived with a small case of holy water, a crucifix and a Bible. He walked through each room, reciting prayers and sprinkling holy water, his voice firm and steady. When he reached Jake's room, the temperature dropped noticeably, a cold chill spreading through the air. "This is where he is strongest," Father O'Malley said, his breath visible in the frigid air. "You must be strong, for he will not leave easily." He performed the blessing, his voice echoing in the stillness. For a moment, it seemed like it might work. The air grew warmer, the oppressive feeling lifted, and I began to hope that we were finally free of the Hat Man. But then, Jake screamed. We rushed to his room to find him sitting up in bed, his eyes wide with terror. "He's here!" he cried, pointing to the corner. "He's in the room!" I looked, and my blood ran cold. The Hat Man was back, his shadowy form darker than ever, his presence suffocating. Father O'Malley raised his crucifix, his voice rising in prayer, but the Hat Man didn't flinch. Instead, he seemed to grow larger, more solid, his malevolent energy filling the room. I grabbed Jake, pulling him into my arms, and backed away. The air was thick with darkness, the very walls seeming to close in on us. Father O'Malley continued to pray, his voice shaking as the Hat Man slowly advanced. Then, something incredible happened. Jake, my terrified little boy, stood up. He pushed away from me and faced the Hat Man, his small body trembling but resolute. "You don't scare me!" Jake shouted, his voice strong and defiant. "You can't hurt me!" For a moment, the Hat Man paused, as if taken aback by the sudden burst of courage. The darkness around him wavered, flickering like a dying flame. Father O'Malley seized the moment, his prayers growing louder, more forceful. The Hat Man let out a low rumbling growl, his form flickering, fading in and out. And then, with a final shuddering breath, he disappeared, the shadows dissolving into nothingness. The room was silent, the air still. The cold chill was gone, replaced by a warmth that felt like a long-forgotten embrace. Jake ran into my arms, sobbing with relief, his small body trembling from the ordeal. Maria rushed over, wrapping both of us in a tight hug as Father O'Malley continued his prayers, sealing the room with a final blessing. For the first time in weeks, Jake slept peacefully that night. There were no screams, No terror-filled awakenings, no shadowy figures looming in the dark. The oppressive atmosphere that had plagued our home seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of calm that we hadn't felt since moving in. The next morning, Jake seemed like his old self again, bright-eyed and full of energy. He didn't mention the Hat Man, and we didn't press him on it. It was as if the shadowy figure had never existed, a bad dream that had finally ended. But Maria and I knew better. We knew the danger that had lurked in the darkness, the evil that had tried to take hold of our son. Father O'Malley returned a few days later to check on us, his expression one of cautious optimism. "How's Jake?" he asked, his eyes scanning the house as if checking for any lingering traces of darkness. "He's doing much better," I said. "No more nightmares, no more visits." Father O'Malley nodded, but his expression remained serious. "The Hat Man is a persistent entity. He's been driven away, but he's not gone for good. If he senses fear again, he may try to return." The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed it away. "We'll be strong," I said, more to myself than to him. "We'll make sure he can't come back." Father O'Malley smiled, a rare moment of warmth in his otherwise stern demeanor. "That's the key. The Hat Man thrives on fear, but if you face him with courage, he loses his power." We thanked him again for his help, knowing that without him, the outcome might have been very different. As he left, Maria and I exchanged a look, both of us understanding that our lives had changed forever. We had faced something dark, something evil, and come out the other side stronger for it. Months passed, and life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an experience. Jake continued to thrive, his fear of the dark gone, replaced by a newfound confidence. The house, once a place of dread, became a home filled with laughter and light. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows grow long, I think about the Hat Man. I wonder where he is, if he's watching from the darkness, waiting for a moment of weakness. But then I remember Jake, standing tall and defiant in the face of terror, and I know that we've beaten him before. If he ever tries to come back, we'll be ready. The Hat Man may be a shadow, a figment of the darkness, but we have something stronger, our love, our courage, and our determination to keep our family safe. And as long as we hold on to that, no shadow can ever take us down. But still, every so often, when I catch a glimpse of a dark corner or hear the creak of the floorboards at night, I remind myself to stay vigilant. After all, the Hat Man is out there, somewhere in the silent darkness, waiting for his next chance to strike. And if he does, we'll be ready. Thanks for joining our spooky story time. Bloody subscribe and keep the nightmares coming. Good night.